We're coming off a wild week 5 fantasy football, guys. And during this time of the year, guys, it gets really tougher and tougher to trade for really quality players of fantasy football. As everybody's got some game tape on guys, and there's really some solid numbers coming out at this point, it gets harder and harder. On this channel, I've hit on a lot of guys that are big buy low guys this week, and there are tons of them this week again. So today we are getting into 6 buy low trade targets before week 6 fantasy football. I'm back in full swing, guys. Apologize for being away for over the weekend. We are back and we are ready to go right now, guys. I just hit 5,000 subscribers last week. I need your help to get to 6. So please go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. So let's go ahead and dive into my first guy. And this guy has already made an appearance on this list already this year, and I think it's a great time to buy him again this year. It's Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. I think it's a great idea to buy him again right now because here's been his reality since the start of the season. Nico Collins has had basically 1 game on and 1 game off. So in week 4, he absolutely ripped the Steelers apart. He had 2 touchdowns in that game and well over 100 yards of receiving. This week, he comes back down to earth and he really doesn't do very much. He had like 30 yards yesterday against the Atlanta Falcons in a game where I thought that Houston was probably going to handle Atlanta pretty good in that game. But that's not how it happened. So now when you look at the averages on the screen, you see that they're not bad, but they're not exactly great. Like he's seeing 7.2 targets per game, 5 receptions a game. He's got 15.4 fantasy points per game, which is a very, very good number, guys. And here's the reality with the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans are not a great team yet. They're not there yet. I'm looking at this Houston Texans team as an ascending asset. They continue to get better week by week, but they're still not a perfect team. They still have a rookie quarterback. They still have a rookie head coach, and that showed on Sunday versus the Atlanta Falcons. It showed. They lost to the Atlanta Falcons on that Sunday. CJ Stroud, still looking very good though. Has not thrown an interception yet this year, and he's been, for the most part, largely very accurate when the Houston Texans offense protects him. So I do believe that Nico Collins, again, is going to have great weeks ahead of him. Nico Collins is a very, very good player in fantasy football, guys. And this is the type of guy that does not have a set-in-stone value yet in fantasy football. A lot of people are trying to figure out where exactly Nico Collins belongs in their fantasy football rankings and really what tier he belongs in. So as far as trading for a guy like Nico Collins, Nico Collins is someone I think that I can send someone like a Jordan Addison for, a Garrett Wilson for, a Romeo Doubs for. Those are the tiers of guys I think I can sell because all of those guys are really middle to lower end wide receiver 2s in fantasy football. And Nico Collins, to me, what we're looking at with Nico Collins is this guy is either a back end wide receiver 1 or is he a front end wide receiver 2 in fantasy football. It's a really clear choice to me, guys. Nico Collins is someone that really doesn't have set fantasy football value yet, and that's why you need to take advantage of this bad week that he is coming off of in fantasy football. Now, our next guy here, this is someone that I didn't think was going to be on here, and honestly, it's going to be tough to get this guy. But we're trying to get Bea Robinson this week of the Atlanta Falcons. Here's the reality with Bea Robinson. Is he on the best offense in football? Absolutely not. Also a reality with Bea Robinson. Is he a bad player? Absolutely not. Look at what he's doing per game on the screen right now. So the volume is definitely not exactly where we want it to be, but I could argue that this was going to be expected with Tyler Algier there. This team still wants to use Tyler Algier, but look at how efficient this guy is. 5.4 yards per carry, and he's gotten several touchdowns over the last several weeks to keep him hanging in there at 14.3 fantasy points per game. Bea Robinson is in a situation where the offense is definitely holding him back. You could say the same thing about Kyle Pitts and Drake London. This offense is just not very conducive for good fantasy football play. But where Bea Robinson is going to be a good buy low trade target this week is if you have guys who drafted him. Obviously, he was going in the first round either way. So wherever you're playing, the chances that he was a first round pick are almost 99%, I would say. Bea Robinson's in a situation where if the manager that got him is struggling right now and he's 1-4, maybe he's 0-5, maybe he's staring down the barrel of 2-3, and he's getting desperate, these are the moves we try to make. Bijan Robinson is a guy that I think you could send someone in the favor of. A guy like Raheem Mostert, or maybe even Kyron Williams. I think that those are good trade targets for him right now. Because here's the reality with this type of trade. This type of trade is not going to get done straight up. You're going to have to get a package deal going for him. So if you're looking at a guy like Raheem Mostert, you need to pair him with like a wide receiver 3 type, like someone in the range of George Pickens, to go get a guy like Bijan Robinson. That's the type of trade package you need to get a guy who really is, if we had to redraft today, still going to be a first-round pick in fantasy football drafts. That's Bijan Robinson's reality. So yes, bad game last week, coming off about 30 points last week, and the only thing that saved his week was the touchdown. But Bijan Robinson has better games ahead of him, and this Atlanta offense is only going to continue to feed him because they know that is the only way that they are going to be a successful football team. So moving on to our next guy right here. It's a guy that honestly I could have included in last week's video, but I chose not to because I didn't think people would be ready to do it yet. This week, I'm pretty sure people will be ready to do it. It's Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. I think that people are getting irritated with Chris Olave at this point. When you look at what he did in week 5, he had a total of 2 receptions for 12 yards and a touchdown. Yeah, Chris Olave is not getting the volume that we once thought he would. So when you look at his on-screen averages right here, this has kind of been a result of the problem right here. So not only did he had a low volume week this past week, but it was also the first week where he logged a touchdown reception. So as a result, he's got 10.1 fantasy points per game. And the last 2 weeks, he really hasn't had any yards to speak of in those games. So it's dropped his yards per game average down to 63.6. 5 receptions per game, 8.6 targets per game is what we need to hang our hats on right now. Because he still is seeing the volume. And in fact, in week 5, Chris Olave actually had 5 targets and he had 6 targets the week before. So here's really what the direct result of this is. He's being hampered by an injured quarterback. Derek Carr is not at his full health. They got lucky yesterday from a game perspective when they absolutely rolled over the awful New England Patriots team. But this is a situation for Chris Olave where people are starting to hit the panic button a little bit on this one. I mean, this guy was at worst a 3rd-round pick, and he's not really living up to that right now. He's a back-end wide receiver 3 in fantasy football right now. But here's the thing about Chris Olave, is we know exactly what this guy can do. Chris Olave is a big play threat. His average depth of target still remains at the top of the league, and also as well as his yards per route run still being at a very good number as well. Chris Olave is going to hit big plays. The problem is, will Derek Carr be healthy? And that's given people real concern, and I understand that. And that's why I think that Chris Olave is actually on the market more than people believe he is. Because Chris Olave is not only dealing with a couple strings of pretty bad games, he's also dealing with a quarterback who is clearly injured. He's clearly injured. It's very similar to a Joe Burrow situation, except Derek Carr is not the talent that Joe Burrow is. So that's the problem, and that's why I believe he is going to be on the market more than you think this week, and why you should go and try to send a guy like Garrett Wilson packaged together with a low-end RB3 like Najee Harris. Or if you wanted to try to sell high on DJ Moore right now, by the way, wide receiver 3 in fantasy football through 5 weeks right now, I would even sell DJ Moore on the high and get a guy like Chris Olave in return. I would try to get Chris Olave and another RB2 in return for DJ Moore right now. This is a move I think can be done. Last week, like I said, I could have put him on this list. This week, I feel really good about having Chris Olave on a buy low trade target list. So moving on to our next guy right here, it's going to be kind of interesting to talk about because when you look at what happened last week, when we go through it, it makes very little sense. But it's Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. I think we need to be trading for him now. Listen, Jonathan Taylor's whole 2023 season has been a complete mess. I mean, it's a guy who literally came into the offseason, no problems at all. The running back Zoom meeting happens, and Jonathan Taylor is one of the last ones to hold out. He decides he doesn't want to play for the Indianapolis Colts anymore. The owner gets involved. It's just a big, giant mess. Gets put on PUP list, and he's out for the first several weeks. So honestly, I had been saying, and you guys who've been watching this channel for the whole season know this, I've been worried about Jonathan Taylor. I was not confident in having a guy like Jonathan Taylor on my team in fantasy football. I knew that they were going to activate him, but I did not know if he was going to play. And then literally about 24 hours before game time, he signs a massive extension, 3 years, $42 million, over $25 million guaranteed in the contract. So again, this is just a weird situation because then he comes in the same week and he only rushes the ball for 6 carries and 18 yards, has 1 catch for 16 yards, and all the while, Zach Moss lights the world on fire again in fantasy football. So what is really the breakdown going to be here? Well, here's the thing. Jonathan Taylor is a great trade target for a couple of different reasons. Jonathan Taylor is in a situation where he is going to be starting slow, just like Josh Jacobs did, right? Because this is a guy who missed a ton of offseason time. He's not coming in fully healthy. He's not been hit a bunch in practice to prepare him for games. So this is a natural slow start situation. And as far as future workload goes, think about the situation they were in last week, where he's coming off an injury, off the PUP list, hasn't been with the team in several weeks, and now we're just going to throw him out there and give him 20 plus touches. That was never going to happen. Never going to happen. So yes, Zach Moss was great, but this is a running back they just guaranteed over 20 plus million to. They're not going to just keep him on the bench. It's very similar to my argument for David Montgomery over the offseason, and look how that has turned out. Jonathan Taylor is going to get more volume as the weeks come. And as someone who has held Jonathan Taylor throughout this whole process on several teams where I drafted him in like the 5th or 6th round, I can tell you for a fact that some people are going to be very panicky about this situation because some who drafted him held on to him throughout this whole time, and they're in much worse shape than I am. They're in 1-4 territory or 0-5 territory. This is a situation where Jonathan Taylor, while things are not guaranteed from a performance perspective just yet, he is going to continue to get more volume, and I will always take the upside of a player like this. So moving on to our next guy on the list, man, this is an interesting one. Tony Pollard of the Dallas Cowboys, I think, is a great trade target this week. Here's the thing about Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard started out extremely well. He was a top 4 running back for several weeks straight right here. Now, over the past several weeks, last week against New England, this past game against the San Francisco 49ers, it's not been good. And honestly, this Dallas Cowboys offense has not been very good either. But Tony Pollard, here's what we're looking at the numbers here. 16.2 rushes per game, 13 fantasy points per game now. But he's still averaging 4.4 targets per game. And here's really why I was encouraged about Sunday night's game against the San Francisco 49ers. So when it was basically all said and done, by the time they were down 28-10, and by the time they were down 35-10, this team still was trying to get Tony Pollard involved. They were using him more as a pass catcher. They know, the Dallas Cowboys know, they need Tony Pollard to be successful. That's their reality right here. So this is a team that knows they have to use him to be successful, and they're falling on hard times. The Dallas Cowboys need to figure it out on offense because Dak Prescott is not the answer. You cannot have Dak Prescott throwing the ball 30 plus times. This is not the answer. This team knows they need Tony Pollard, and this offensive line is still good enough to get it done, and their schedule lightens up immediately in week 6 when they take on the Los Angeles Chargers defense. This is a good rebound game for Tony Pollard, and this is a very rare time where I believe you can get a top 5 running back in fantasy football in exchange for a guy like Bea Robinson. That's a deal that I would try to package up and try to get. I would also try to send a Derrick Henry or a James Conner in the direction of the Tony Pollard manager, because the reality is Tony Pollard's upside is way higher than all those guys, and this team is going to get it figured out. Our last guy on here, we're trading for another injured player. It's going to be Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants. Listen, here's the problem with when he comes back. This team is absolutely awful. They're absolutely awful. So the problem is, what is the upside really? Well, just based on 2 games with that same awful team, I would say the upside is really high. Really, if nothing else, just from a volume standpoint, because this team needs Saquon Barkley. That's the reality here. They cannot afford to not have him on the field and producing for them, because this is a great player and he's also the best offensive playmaker they've got. Daniel Jones cannot get it done by himself. So I think that Saquon Barkley, again, it goes back to Cooper Kupp last week and what I said. It goes back to Austin Eckler a couple weeks ago, what I said. Saquon Barkley was likely someone's second-round pick at the very latest. So if you're going to get a guy like this, you need to target someone who's desperate and they're in bad shape right now. And you could try to send a guy, again, in the range of like a Bea Robinson or even a Derrick Henry. I would even try to trade Zach Moss in exchange for him at this point. That's what I would try to do. But regardless of how you approach it, this is a situation where you need to try to trade for Saquon Barkley because the upside, even though he's on a bad team, is really, really high. So let me know who you are actively buying and selling before week 6 fantasy football and what questions you need answered before the week. I'm going to try to go down there and answer every single comment. I missed a lot of comments over the weekend and I need to catch up on you guys. And this afternoon, we'll have the waiver wire video coming up at 2 p.m. Central. So make sure to stay tuned for that video and I'll see y'all there.